Good morning, everyone. I'm Wendy Cutler, Vice President of the Asia Society Policy Institute, and I'll be moderating the program from now until lunch. I think we've got a great program for you coming up over the next hour, and I hope when you listen to this exceptional group of women that we'll be talking to, that you'll feel the same way that I do. I'm so thrilled not only to be here, but to be here with Asia 21, which is such an important part of the Asia Society family. Not only the current year coming in, but all of the alumni. And I've been with the Asia Society for 8 years, and I just love traveling all around Asia and the world and hearing from someone, oh, I was an Asia 21 fellow. So it's great to meet you all. I also lead another program of emerging leaders for the Asia Society, and that's called the Emerging Female Leaders on Trade program. And I thought what a great opportunity to get both groups to meet each other and to become part of the family, the Asia Society family together. Now, let me just tell you a little bit about this program and what inspired me to set it up. I was a former international trade negotiator for the US government for many years. And one of my jobs about 15 years ago was to lead the US side for the US-Korea Free Trade Agreement negotiations. These were extremely difficult and contentious negotiations. At that time, Korea was a very protected market, and there was a lot of opposition in Korea to embarking on this negotiation with the United States. And we used to come to hotels like this and hold our sessions, about 100 people on each side, and there'd be like hundreds or thousands of protesters outside the hotel, sometimes inside the hotel, very concerned about what we were doing, particularly what their concerns about what the Korean negotiators were giving up to the United States. I will say that it turned out to be a win-win agreement. We just celebrated 15 years of the US-Korea Free Trade Agreement, and both sides were talking about how great relations are between the US and Korea, not only on the security front, but on the economic front as well. So why am I telling you this story? Because when I negotiated this agreement, it really hit me that out of the 100 people on the side of the Koreans, about 98 of them were men. There were very few women on the Korean delegation. But in the United States, I would say about 50% of my team was female. And when I left the government and I joined the Asia Society, one of the things I really wanted to accomplish was to kind of give it back and to help female negotiators in Asia get to the table, kind of teach them the skills they need, build the confidence, understand US trade policy, and discuss just policy trends more broadly in the economic space. And that's how this program was conceived. We are now in our fourth, hopefully our fifth year soon. We'll be continuing the program with Korean women. We're also doing a parallel program with Japanese women, and a third program with ASEAN women, where our first cohort had women from 8 Southeast Asian countries. So this is a very exciting program, and today we're going to be honored and tell you a little more about the women who will be joining us today on the panel. But first, we could not have done this work without the generous support of the Korea Foundation. And I would love right now introduce you to the president of the Korea Foundation, Kim Gheewhan, who is an old trade friend of mine who used to work for the Korean government on trade. I think, if my notes are right, you joined the Ministry of at that time, Foreign Affairs and Trade in 1983. We got to know each other when he was economic minister in Washington in the embassy, and then became the consul general in New York for the Korean government. So without further ado, let me invite Kim Gheewhan. He's going to offer a few remarks, and then I will be back. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Wendy. Thank you for inviting me this important session. Actually, as Wendy introduced me, I served as a economic minister at the Korean Embassy in Washington, D.C. It was a time passing Korea-U.S. Free Trade Agreement bill in the Congress and the ratification procedure in Korea. It was a very tough time. We needed bipartisan support in the U.S. Congress, and also we need to get over the opposition's resistance on this important measure. And thanks to Wendy's good service and collaboration, I think our mission accomplished. We passed Korea's FTA bill in U.S. Congress in 3 days, Senate and House. It was a record speed as ever seen during my service, as well as I think is a long service at the Korean embassy colleagues, embassy colleagues. So this is a real great opportunity. My name is Kim Gheewhan, President of Korea Foundation. It is my real pleasure to make some remarks at Asia 21 Summit session on navigating economic challenges in a changing world. Meeting with young leaders from around the world is always a delight, and congratulations on every one of you on making or beginning remarkable professional careers. Standing here with Wendy and young female trade leaders in particular brings back a good memory and a sense of colleagueship reminiscent of my earlier days in foreign trade affairs. Since 1991, the Korea Foundation has been carrying out a diverse international exchange programs around the world. We promote Korean studies at the universities and think tanks overseas. We provide scholarship and fellowships. We invite young and senior leaders, provide networking programs, and help exhibit Korean arts and culture at museums and galleries. Quite a venture. I really enjoy these programs as a head of the Korea Foundation president. For a long time, Korea Foundation has been a supporter of Next Generation Leaders programs. I'm really happy to have been sponsoring the Asia Society program on trade and young female leaders since 2019. In upcoming February next year, we'll help the Schmidt Futures, Eric Schmidt Philanthropy Organization, hold the 2024 International Strategy Forum, a global summit conference in Seoul that will invite around 120 young technology, innovation, policy, civil society, and media fellows to 5 regional meetings and 5 thematic sessions on global issues that we are confronting now. We are also beginning a Korea Foundation Global Fellow program soon. Starting next year, 2 different groups of Korea Foundation Young Global Fellows will visit 3 cities in the United States and 3 cities in Europe, having opportunities to network with young professional leaders like you. We'll send a U.S. group of Global Fellows, first of all, to Asia Society, New York. And currently, the world is confronting the kind of polycrisis that comes from Russia's invasion and ongoing warfare with Ukraine, Hamas-Israel warfare, rise of assertive China and strategic competition between the United States and China, and North Korea's unyielding nuclear and missile provocations and threats amid global economic downturns and difficulties. Globalization and multilateralism seems gradually fading away in an ever-fragmenting world. Instead, multilateralism, plurilateralism are showing up, and collaborations among trustworthy partners are becoming more useful channels for building cooperation on emerging critical technologies such as artificial intelligence, quantum computing, bio-climate change, space technologies, and on their corresponding reliable supply chains as well. Emerging technologies like artificial intelligence and quantum computing are not only commercially innovative technologies, but also highly sensitive military applications. Over-dependence on a certain country is considered increasingly as risk, and diversification has become important consideration. A range of new export control and investment screening measures on dual-use technologies and products are frequently utilized, while multilateral trade institutions like WTO or bilateral regional free trade agreements are gradually losing impact and relevancy on newly emerging economic security issues. Small yard, high fence is a term and description that explains US-China competition and de-risking. But fierce competition inside a small yard seems to affect negatively the general business as usual relations with China in other than small yard areas. How to stabilize, how to make predictable the relations between United States and China, including avoidance of emergencies, military or some other conflict, in the Pacific region and beyond is becoming one of the important issues that need to be addressed properly and timely. Korea's current global pivotal state diplomacy in the Pacific strategy is a proactive endeavors to cope with this global poly-crisis situation and policy to make contributions to, together with our allies and partners, for enhancing peace and security in the Indo-Pacific region and beyond. Recent United States-Korea-Japan trilateral summit at Camp David in August this year, also opening a new horizons of trilateral collaborations on defense and security, emerging technologies, and corresponding supply chains, and other areas, including official development assistance as well. Again, I want to thank Asia Society and Vice President Wendy for organizing this session and inviting me, and pass my best wishes to all participants too. Thank you.
So next, I have the pleasure of introducing the DCM at the U.S. Embassy in Seoul, Ms. Joy Sakurai. I think at the dinner last night, we all heard the words of our ambassador to Korea, Philip Goldberg, and Joy works as the #2 in the embassy, playing a really crucial role, not only on policy, but also on just keeping the trains running at the embassy. She joined the Foreign Service in 2003, and since then has held many positions all over the world, but including in this region, in Indonesia, Japan, and Laos. We welcome her thoughts on initiatives that the Biden administration is taking to promote gender equality, and also to do that not only domestically, but as well through international initiatives. Thank you. Joy, please join us.
Thank you, Vice President Cutler, for the very warm introduction. And I want to say a special greeting as well to President Kim Gheewhan for his remarks, and most of all to say hello to all of this year's Asia 21 Fellows and the alumni. So I met some of you last night at the dinner, and then it's really great to see alumni who are still in Korea or maybe even came in from different parts of the region to really keep this activity alive. And I look forward to some time being in, somewhere in the world, as Vice President Cutler said, and someone mentioning to me that you were part of this program, because I think these opportunities that you have through your network are going to continue to be valuable to you for your careers and the lives that you will lead ahead. I want to say congratulations to Asia Society for a 15th year milestone. It's fantastic to see how broadly this society has grown. The New York, of course, is the headquarters, the flagship, but I know how much Korea's office here is really the regional powerhouse for what Asia Society does. So congratulations on this special anniversary. And then I'll like to talk briefly about what you'll discuss ahead with the very distinguished panel. You'll be talking about navigating economic challenges in a changing world, but to focus a little bit about how we view these opportunities ahead. At the U.S. Embassy, at the U.S. government level, all the way at the senior level up to President Biden, we know that as to quote him, focusing on lifting up the rights of women and girls through every aspect of both our foreign and domestic policy is important. And I think it's especially important because of the ways that our economies are changing with technology, with different foreign policy things that are shifting so rapidly and are unforeseen. The ability to pivot quickly and to really harness and maximize everything that we have through our human resources is more important now than ever. Around the world, we're seeing that working with our counterparts, at least from the United States side, our partners, allies, and friends, it gets things done that in a way that we had never imagined before possible. Just as even a small example, working with Korea, who is one of our strongest allies in this region, we see that they are very rapid in humanitarian assistance, and we can leverage Korea's economic power to support us in providing humanitarian assistance to Ukraine. So moving around the globe, we see that there are ways that we can use each other's resources to not overlap, but then sometimes to collaborate to make things happen. And let's see. As many of you noticed, in the August Camp David Trilateral Summit in Washington, D.C., President Biden, President Yoon, and Japan's Prime Minister Kishida agreed on trilateral initiatives to advance women and girls in STEM fields, strengthen domestic care infrastructure, and facilitate women's full and meaningful participation in all sectors of society. And today we have a very senior visitor from Washington. We have Jake Sullivan, our national security advisor, who is here meeting with his Korean and his Japanese counterparts to advance just this very issue. I won't talk too much about it. Our U.S. Embassy in Seoul here has also done a number of women's mentoring programs, but actually one of my colleagues will be on the panel later, so you can ask her to describe it a little bit more in detail. What I did want to use my time here is to emphasize to all of you, the fellows and the alumni and maybe other leaders in the room, that there was a Harvard Business Review study done a few years ago, and it focused on why there are so few female CEOs around the world. There wasn't sort of one single data point that they could point to. It was more of a broad feeling, but they interviewed all of these male CEOs and they said, usually when you have to make a decision on who's ready to lead next, you look at the resumes and the women and men are about equal, but then it comes down to discussion, and oftentimes it seems that the men have had more experiences that align them to take that next leadership role. And so what I'm asking all of you to consider is that the women are just as ready. Sometimes they just haven't been selected to be put in those positions of leadership because they didn't have the right opportunities to grow and to advance. Actually, one of my colleagues right in the room here, we were just talking about that. Kristen and I were just talking about giving opportunities to grow, especially when you can do something at a little low stakes level, so you're ready when it comes to a very high stakes opportunity. Does that kind of sound familiar? I think because men are often, I'll raise my hand, I don't care, I'll do it, yeah, pick me. Women sometimes hold back because they feel they have to be a little more ready to take the stage. So look for those ways to help build those opportunities for especially for female colleagues, or even just colleagues who are a little bit shyer to raise their hand, to give them that chance. I would like to say that, I had an interesting conversation yesterday with the Ewha Women's University president. It's, for those of you who aren't familiar, it is Korea's arguably their most prestigious women's university. They're educating 25,000 women to lead Korea in the years ahead. And she said, rather than just focusing on role models, because you may not always have the right role model there in front of you at the right time, consider yourself a trailblazer. And that's what they tell their students. So be a trailblazer, as Vice President Cutler has been. Sometimes she was the only one there to lead and not looking. She may not have been able to look at someone ahead of her who had done it. She was blazing that path. Gheewhan as well, Gheewhan Kim, leading Asia Society Korea as a trailblazer in what she did. So those are just a couple of highlights I would ask for all of you to keep in mind. As a diplomat, as many of my diplomat colleagues know, as I said, working together with others, that collaboration piece is so important, because then you don't actually even have to be the expert or have the resources or have the knowledge to do everything yourself. And a lot of what you see diplomatic work, it might look like we're dealing with hard negotiations or hard foreign policy, and that is a big sliver of what we do. But as my colleague Kristen knows very well, others know very well, it's that relationship piece, building those relationships year after year, so that foundation is always strong. And so what better way than to look at yourselves, look around the room, and what foundations and relationships are you building so that you know how to use them when the moment comes. The last takeaway I would offer is that the US government, all of our governments, your home governments, are working very hard to find the best opportunities for the citizens of their country to look for ways to advance economic opportunities to face the global challenges ahead. However, we can't do it alone, and that's what all of you are here for, to provide us that support, to blaze that trail for us, to give us those chances to really make the best difference possible. So I could go on longer, but I think I'll close there because you have excellent panelists coming up. But good luck to all of you, and I look forward to someone someday when I'm in some country tapping me on the shoulder and saying, "Hey, I'm a next gen 21. I'm sorry if I got that wrong. Fellow, and do recruit your successors who will be participants, especially those who you think may be too shy to raise their hand. Look for those who have the potential and put them in front so they can be the CEOs or the ambassadors or the trade negotiators of the next generation." Thank you.
Okay, well, with that, thank you very much, Joy, for your inspirational comments. And now we're all going to think of ourselves as trailblazers. Thanks again for joining us. So what I'd like to do now is to invite our panelists. And again, all of these women have participated in our Emerging Leaders program since 2019. So let me briefly introduce them, and then we're going to get right into a moderated conversation. So first, and from our inaugural cohort in 2019, I'm pleased to announce Ms. Ji Yeon Song, a senior attorney at Kim Chang, which is a leading Korean law firm. Some say the leading Korean law firm. Is this working? Yeah, now it is, right? Okay. She, in her practice, focuses on antitrust, competition, international trade. She helps Korean companies that are subject to either WTO dispute settlement or to trade remedy cases from the US, Europe, and other countries. And importantly, what I just learned, in 2022, she was awarded International Trade Lawyer of the Year by Euromoney. And so that's a very prestigious award, so congratulations. Moving on now, I'd like to introduce Miss Ara Cho. She works for KITA. Ara, raise your hand. Yeah. The Korea International Trade Association. And what trade associations do, they represent a whole lot of different companies trying to advocate their positions to policymakers, not only in Korea, but all over the world. She has successfully organized numerous presidential level economic fora, successfully addressing critical trade issues and fostering economic cooperation. Next, our third panelist I'd like to introduce is Eun-Young Jeong, who currently works at the U.S. Embassy in Seoul as an economic specialist. You work for Joy? Yeah. And what she does there is she analyzes and reports on trade and industry developments for U.S. policymakers. Previously, she worked as a journalist for the Wall Street Journal's Seoul Bureau, where she covered business and economic stories across Asia. And then finally, we're pleased to have Ms. Jung Yoon Kim, who's our only panelist today who works for the Korean government, the Ministry of Trade and Industry and Energy. She's now working on energy, but when you were with us, you had just changed jobs after an illustrative career working not only on export controls, but on U.S.-Korea trade relations. So with that, I think we've got a great group of women together, I will say they're not going to say. Some of them are a little nervous. They don't do a lot of public speaking. But as Joy said, we need to get up there, ask questions, and participate. And so I think I'm looking forward to the conversation, and I will have a time to entertain questions from the audience as well. So thank you for all joining. And let me start with a question I'm going to ask to each of you. If you can tell us a little bit about your career, what got you interested in trade, and what have you done so far in your career that you'd like to share with the audience? So if I can start with you, Ji Yeon, that would be great.
Yeah. So I'm an attorney at a law firm, and my main practice area is anti-competition law, as well as international trade. So when I was a teenager, I liked reading newspapers, especially the international section. And reading such newspapers, I could see that Korea has achieved a remarkable development for such a short period of time through a global trading system. So despite a small country with a modest population, Korea possesses a talented pool of individuals and advanced technology. So consequently, we could benefit from exporting our innovative technology at the same time importing raw materials from foreign countries. So this exchange could mutually benefit the other countries as well. And that was the reason why I decided to work in the international trade field. My initial dream was to become a diplomat, but I pursued a career in law because of my father's advice that understanding law would help play a crucial role in pursuing any other dreams that I had, including diplomacy and journalism.
Okay. Well, thank you for that. We're going to delve into we'll follow up in a little bit. Okay, Eun-Young, how about you? Why trade?
So I'm going to look a little different because my interest in trade was a very gradual buildup. So I came out of college actually with an interest in going into humanitarian development because at the time I was very interested and passionate about education opportunities for refugee children. And that got me as a job working as an education program officer with UNICEF in Uganda, which was a great exposure. But at the same time, I think at an earlier point in my career, I think I craved something that was a little bit faster paced and that allowed me to be able to see outputs in a shorter time frame. I guess I didn't have the patience back then. So I turned to journalism, which I had exposure to through short gigs here and there before. And later, when I initially got an offer to work at the Wall Street Journal, I was actually a little torn because at the time, in my view, the Wall Street Journal was a place that wrote about how money moves. And I cared more about people. And I remember kind of contemplating about this and speaking with a former boss that I used to work with at the AP, who actually gave me a great insight, which has stuck with me to this day, which was, yes, you'll probably be writing about how money moves, but if you think about it, at the end of the day, it's people who move the money. So kind of with that advice, I joined the Wall Street Journal and I started covering business news out of Korea, mostly first focusing on companies and the products that they make. But later on, over time, I found myself increasingly writing more about how these companies are positioned in the context of global supply chain disruptions, the COVID-19 pandemic, and export controls regulations. And sometimes I did get a chance to write about individuals whose lives were impacted by these big macro trade and economic trends. So that's kind of what I continue to do, and that's what's led me to my current role at the U.S. Embassy, where I continue to write about trade policies, but also with the opportunities to meet and speak with people like Wendy, who are, the decision makers behind the trade policies that we see today.
All right, Jung Yoon, over to you. Now, you now work on energy, but you were working on trade. Let me ask you first, what do you like better, energy or trade?
Well, I think, thank you for that very difficult question.
You don't have to answer it.
I started my career in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade back in 2009. And at that time, I was working in the WTO division. And at that time, there was still the DDA negotiations undergoing in the WTO. And my personal experience in the WTO division was very decisive for me to work in this area, the trade area, because I had a very good opportunity to speak out in front of the other representatives in the WTO. And that experience was very special because I could be as a representative of Korean government, and that experience could lead me to lead my career in the trade area. I have been working in the multilateral divisions, and I have participated in some FTA negotiations with some Asian countries. And also I did the trade controls policy last year, and including the export control consultation with the US government last year regarding the Chinese semiconductor export control restriction. And now I'm working, I moved my area to the energy because I'm now working in the gas division, which is dealing with the domestic natural gas policy. And also we are doing the international cooperation with other countries regarding the energy supply security. And these days, especially after the Russian-Ukraine war, the natural gas supply chain is really important for all of the world. The Russia's attack could cut the pipeline to the Europe, so the global LNG supply chain has changed. So there are a growing LNG market in the global area now. So this kind of global landscape is closely related to the trade issues, I think. And we are also having the commitment of the climate change issues. So I wanted to study more, and I wanted to expand my expert because I did some trade issues before, and now we are in a changing world. So I had mind to change my area to the energy and trade issues. So I'm working now, and I'm very pleased to be here to meet Wendy again, and also President Kim Gheewhan, who I did work for him back then, the MOFAT period. So thank you very much for coming here.
Could you just share with us for 1 minute, because you have been working for the government on trade for many years, is my impression correct that that historically there have been very few women in Korean ministries working in this field, but in recent years women have at least 50% of the jobs now, that a lot of these ministries are more and more heavily populated by women?
I think especially in trade divisions, there are more women than the other industrial divisions or energy divisions. I think it's because in trade area, we have to study more, and we have to study very prepared for the negotiations. So I think that point that could be appealed to the women in the government. So I think that could be one of the big factors for women to work in the trade area. And I don't know the exact percentage of how many women working in the trade division now, but I think maybe around 50% of women is working in the trade division now.
Okay, Ara, over to you then. What got you interested in trade?
Okay. While pursuing my undergraduate degree in international trade, my interest deepened in subject such as international trade laws and WTO laws. So following graduation, I joined the Korea International Trade Association and took on a role in preparing various position papers on trade issues. During this time, I played a key role in presenting companies' opinion to Korean government on the WHO's recommendation to ban the 1,4-butane deal, which are widely used in industrial materials. And fortunately, our efforts yielded positive result, and the recommendation was withdrawn. So since then, I am indulged in working in trade fields.
Well, thank you. Now let's maybe then pivot a little to what's going on in the trade world today. When I started my career, and we're not going to mention how many years ago that was, that when we worked on trade, it was mainly trade in goods, and we were dealing a lot with tariffs, which are taxes on imports. We were dealing with kind of restrictions at the border that prevented goods from getting into a country. But over time, that really changed, and all of a sudden you saw trade agreements expanded to cover issues like intellectual property protection, to cover labor, to cover the environment, and the list goes on and on. And now today, even those issues seem kind of old. And we're in a world now where whether you talk about energy, or you talk about climate, or you talk about health, for example, all of those issues have a nexus with trade. And I think Eun-Young, you mentioned technology, how technology has just impacted everything we do, but also in the trade space, that more and more trade is being conducted through digital means, and that means you need new rules to govern digital. So my question for the panelists are, as you look forward in trade, or in terms of, or even on the issues you're working on now, whether it be health or climate or digital or other issues, where do you see the future of trade going? Like, which issues do you think a year from now in trade everyone's going to be talking about? Who'd like to go first? Or I'm going to assign someone. Okay. Good for you.
Yeah, actually, I always go first when I join your program.
That was one of the lessons we've been teaching in our program, that don't be shy and to get right in there and to ask questions and to participate. So you get an A+.
Yeah, thank you. This green economy is really catching my interest. Especially, I've been looking into the impact on the strengthened international plastic regulations on industries. In September, UN General Assembly on Environment shared a draft of the Convention on Plastic, signaling their aim to establish regulations on international scale rather than a national one. What's crucial to note is that the Convention addresses obligations related to plastic pollutions through the entire cycle from the production to the disposal. This makes it urgent for companies to respond. And given that plastics are used in virtually in all the industries, not just in plastic bags and the disposable product directly related, so we are closely examining how the measures will bring about the changes in the international industrial structure. So that's my recent interest on green economy.
Okay. Anyone else want to comment on the green economy and the nexus between trade and climate?
Well, it's not. I think it's not very directly related to that green economy issues, but I think the current trend of climate change issue is very closely related to the trade issues in the coming years, because I think these days every country has to achieve two different objectives. So one is that we have to secure the energy supply security, and also we have another objective of to achieving the net zero in 2030 or 2050. Many countries under the Paris Agreement has committed to their nationally determined contributions, and also we have to try to find some measures how to reduce the fossil fuel use. But in reality, it is very, very difficult for industries and also for government as well. So so because of that, I believe that the U.S. government has also Inflation Reduction Act, and also European Union has its carbon management adjustment management measure. So those kind of very big measures could be the trade barriers for other partners, such as.
Can you explain how they can be trade barriers?
Well, for example, in Korea, we had the government had a very difficult situation last year because of the Inflation Reduction Act. Because when the U.S. government announced the Inflation Reduction Act, I think it's not very intentional, but the effect is that Korean vehicles will lose its competitiveness in the U.S. market because of some subsidy issues. So that point, because of this law, wish to achieve the climate change objectives, but it affects to other countries' trade structure. Yeah, so that's that point. Because of that point, Korean government has a very difficult situation domestically and politically. So I thought that Korea and the U.S. has a very long discussions and consultations with these issues, and they are trying to find out some solution how to handle these issues. And this kind of whole process is kind of trade negotiations, I believe. Yeah, so that could, at that point, I think that there is a trade nexus, climate change issues, I believe.
And I'll just underscore that because I think the whole issue of subsidization, right? Governments pouring money to basically to support the development of green technologies and green industries. And the question is, when you give these subsidies, for example, are you distorting the international market? In trade, we talk a lot about what's called a level playing field, that private companies should be able to compete with each other on a level playing field. But if certain companies are being backed by their government and receiving a lot of money, they can't go bankrupt. They're getting, loans at reduced rates, and they're getting other advantages. Then it's very hard to compete with them on a fair basis. And that's kind of what's happening in this world. I will say I came to Korea about, now it's probably a year and a half ago when the Inflation Reduction Act was just passed. And that's all anyone here wanted to talk about. And particularly, as you mentioned, the Korean car companies felt that they were going to be disadvantaged by this law because Canadian and Mexican car companies would be able to get the funds or get the benefits from some of the benefits from this program. But what was interesting is Korean battery makers stood to gain a lot from the Inflation Reduction Act because by investing in the United States, they could receive subsidies for their investment. And this is where it becomes tricky for governments to figure out, do you want to complain too much about such a law when one industry is benefiting and another industry is being hurt? And those are some of the challenges that trade negotiators and trade specialists work. Now, Eun-Young, I know as working for the U.S. Embassy, I'm sure you've spent many hours sifting through the Inflation Reduction Act and listening to comments from U.S. and Korean industries. What's your take on this, this piece of legislation? And do you think the U.S. and Korea have kind of, let's just say, dealt or resolved their differences in this area?
Thank you for the question. And before I answer, I just want to emphasize that what I say represents my views only and not the views of my organization.
And let me just, I should have said that from the outset for everyone. Everyone's here on a personal basis. And so you're offering your personal views, not the views of the U.S. Embassy, right?
Thank you. Yes. I think both of you, Jung Yoon and Wendy, you raised really great points. First, that on the Inflation Reduction Act, on the point that you mentioned, Wendy, it is true that yes, when the Inflation Reduction Act was first introduced, Korean car makers were, I think, one of the most vocal voices in going against the Reduction Act. But then there were also people who were kind of winners who were keeping very silent, but very happily silent. And I think I think the Inflation Reduction Act is in many sense like a good case in point of what one of the biggest challenges are in what we see today, where you have industrial policies and the impact that it has on global trade. And I think one of the ways in which the Inflation Reduction Act, there are ways in which the Inflation Reduction Act has a lot of strengths, but I think some of its weaknesses are policies like the Inflation Reduction Act are good, but I think they have weaknesses because they're trying to achieve too many things at once. I'm not saying that industrial policies are bad, period, but when you are trying to do too many things through one policies, you're going to have so many conflicting interests, and it's really hard to parse all of those out. So taking the IRA as an example, it tries to expedite the transition to green energy. It tries to create more jobs for Americans. It tries to redirect investments to enable reshoring or friendshoring. It tries to make supply chains more resilient in the process, but in all of this, it also tries to make people take into account the geopolitical tensions between the United States and China. So all of those, I think, are good intentions, but when you try to tackle all of those at once, it can actually have the opposite effect, that it can actually create more inefficiencies. It can make costs higher. And for companies, I think it makes them face bigger uncertainties, which are huge challenges for them in making long-term decisions, which is precisely what you need in this transition to green energy. So I think in order for these policies to move forward and have and succeed in some of the intentions that they are designed to succeed in, it's important to have kind of very tightly designed policies or guidances that enable companies to not have to compromise in coming up with creative solutions. Because it's one thing to be able to score goals when the goalpost is moving, but if you can't even see the goalpost, it's harder to score those goals.
Very well put. Okay, Ji Yeon, you had mentioned early on that one of the reasons that you entered the trade field was just looking at kind of Korea's dependence on trade and its success in the trade area. Maybe you want to comment a little on industrial policy and Korea. The United States now, we've practiced industrial policy through the years, but it's come back in fashion now in the United States through the Inflation Reduction Act. Can you comment a little about how Korea sees industrial policy, or how industrial policy has helped Korea become such an economic powerhouse?
Well, I think Jung Yoon may have more valid answer to that questions, but if your question relates to what kind of factors affected Korean industrial development, I would like to maybe emphasize that we really put emphasis on technology and innovative like science and education for all those kind of area that, so we teach. I think the education is really important in Korea and for Korean parents, and we teach a lot Korean students on not only English, mathematics, science, but also other aspects like cultural aspect as well. And that kind of education, I think, contributed to our like talented individuals as well as a various cultural heritage. So I think that led to our Korean government or Korea as a country to be successful in this for a very short period of time.
I can also add on things that, and Korea is also adapting to the rapid changing dynamics of major economies and keeping pace with the policy change in different countries in real time. And this is very crucial task for the Korea. And the challenge for Korea is to stay responsive and agile in dynamic global trade change. And moreover, Korea also do the concerted effort to explore new growth engines, including digital transformation. So this is one of the successful result for the Korean economy, I think.
You know, it's interesting because Korea does have concerns about growing income inequality that we have in the United States. And I think one of the reasons there's such a backlash against international trade and trade agreements in the United States is because of a feeling that these trade agreements have not benefited our middle class or our working population. So, not to put you on the spot, but in Korea, again, concerns with income inequality, but when it comes to international trade, at least my perception is that it's still very popular among the people. And even when there are concerns, particularly in the protected agriculture sector, that the Korean government has been very active in helping those farmers transition and to learn how to export. Can you just, is that a correct portrayal? Or do you think there will be a backlash against trade agreements in Korea?
Well, as Wendy said before, when we put our FTA strategy from with starting with United States or European Union, there was a really big, huge backlash from farmers or fisheries industry, and I can remember that Korean government tried to make some kind of fund to support their industry transition to other areas, or trying to support them to stay their living standard. And now I think our industrial structure has been changed a lot, but still we are doing the FTA negotiations with some other countries, and still there is a slight backlash from farmers and fisheries again. So I think our agriculture or fisheries industry has been grown more and more, but I don't know exactly. But they are still want to more assistance from the government, and we have to talk with them about the market access issues like SPS, including SPS issues. So well, yeah, that is still a very weakness point for the Korean government to start negotiations with other countries.
Okay, I'm going to take one more question and then I'll turn to the audience. And that's just a question on demographics. Because in Korea, Japan, China, Europe, some degree less in the United States, there are some serious demographic challenges. And governments are trying to figure out how to deal with these. And some of the challenges are, frankly, that the birth rates are just going down dramatically. And no matter what certain governments do, the birth rates continue to go down dramatically. And I'd be interested in your views on what kind of government policies could help. A number of you are mothers of young children in Korea. If some of the audience are not aware, there's a lot of burden on women to not only be the principal caregiver for children, but also for elderly parents. I don't have the statistic here, but believe it or not, the OECD in Paris keeps statistics on the amount of time in a household husbands spend on housework. And of all the OECD countries, Korea always comes out on the bottom. And I think it used to be like 32 minutes, where in the United States it was like 2 hours. So there's just a lot of pressure on working women in Korea, which sometimes leads women. They enter the workforce, but it's very difficult for them to stay in the workforce and to juggle their other responsibilities. But that's changing. I'm really intrigued now because China is now experiencing a demographic challenge, and their birth rate is beginning to go down as a result of their one-child policy. But instead of encouraging women to enter the workforce, it seems like what they're telling women now is if you want to be a good citizen, you should just stay at home and make babies. And I have a hard time as a woman in the 21st century to believe that such a message is going to resonate with young women in China or anywhere around the world. But I'd be interested in the views of our panelists, particularly given some of the challenges that you face in balancing kind of the home pressures and work pressures. So, Ara, you took the first one there. I was very impressed. So I'm going to see if anyone else wants. Okay, Ji Yeon.
As I'm a working mom with 2 young children, I consider our low birth rate as the most pressing issue in Korea now. And while there are many policies being discussed, I think the most important support we need is having a sufficiently qualified helper in our home at a reasonable price. So unlike other Asian countries, in Korea, we need to pay about $3,000 per month for salaries for a full-time Korean helper, which is almost a minimum market price. And considering that most women employees at their late 20s who starts their careers earn less than $3,000 per month, this is not sustainable.
Figure out the math.
Yeah, this is not sustainable. So many just opt to quit their job and stay home and raise children, or they just decide not to marry or not to have a baby at all. So therefore, we need to implement policies to legalize the employment of foreigners in our home, which is currently permitted with only limited exceptions. So to do so, we need Korean government support for inviting and training foreigners and employing sufficiently qualified people. Also, I think Korean government should play a role in regulating the wage of such helpers to a certain extent.
Anyone else want to venture? How about subsidizing childcare or promoting longer maternity or paternity leave? Do those policies help?
Well, I also have 2 kids, very young kids, 9 and 5 years old. And my kids are grown up with my mom. And the burden of the childcare is, my burden of childcare is moved to my mom. So I think, and my mom also feel that she cares my kids with love, but she feels that it's very tired, I think. So this kind of situation, as attorney said before, this kind of situation cannot be sustainable longer time. And for Korean government, I think we have a very immediate and short-term measures like some subsidizing to the childcare allowance, or some there is recommended maternity leave or paternity leave. But I think this cannot be very fundamental measure. I think we have to change our male-oriented society environment in Korea, because in Korea I have seen lots of female workers who are working with a very difficulty in promotion or moving position to a better place. So I think without changing this kind of environmental situation, society environmental situation in Korea, any measure cannot be a very fundamental measure.
I think that's a great point. The government can only do so much. You're talking about really trying to change the culture. I mean, one thing I think would help in Korea is limiting the number of hours that folks can work per week. Now, in the United States, it's 40 hours. Korea recently changed the law, but then the new bar was only 60 hours a week, which I think is probably one of the highest levels internationally. All right, with that, any questions from the audience? I see lunch is coming in, so I've been told we don't have a lot of time, so let's keep our questions really short.
Wendy, let's take 2-3 questions at a time for
Okay.
10 minutes, max.
Hi, thanks so much to the panel. I wanted to, my name is Joanna, I'm from Singapore. I wanted to bring the conversation back to trade and climate and that intersection. So to the NDCs, I mean, one of the things about the current economic challenges in the world too that we didn't have time to get to is also the post-pandemic recovery. So there's been dislocations across the world. The World Bank is estimating about 190 million people across the world fell into extreme poverty who otherwise were not. A huge portion of that is actually in Asia, farmers in India in particular. And then there's also massive disruptions to supply chains. In Nigeria, there's 700,000 more people who are facing or children who are facing risk of hunger due to disruptions in chemical fertilizer supply chains that haven't yet been restored. One of the things I'm curious about, The Economist just produced an article about carbon credits as Africa's next export, right? And it's one of those things that's also coming up across developing markets. In a situation of dislocation of access to financial markets and access to markets in general, especially for the global south, could carbon credits as a way of rewarding the global south and poor people in the global south for climate transition be a key mechanism to helping us both achieve our climate goals and emerge well from the pandemic. And one of the key questions that comes up, obviously, is cross-border trade and carbon credits. And so I'm wondering if there's something that could be done or has been discussed in terms of special provisions around trade and carbon credits, specifically
Next
relating
question.
to that.
We got it. I just called on this one. I'll leave it to you, Sandeep.
Huh? Where? Here?
I'm sorry.
It's up front.
Thank you so much for your view. My question is not trade related. I just want to hear, as many of you mentioned that you were first in your field, and now you see more women coming into these male-dominated industry. Do you see things done differently when you hold those positions in the leadership, or you just see that women are populating in, but policies and the way things are done are not changing? So if we bring more women, does that make any difference for women population overall? Thank you.
You pick the third.
I think
Neville
had his hand up.
Thank you, Wendy, and thank you for bringing a very refreshing panel that we have had thus far. So my question is related to the East Asia regionalization. So I just wonder what's your take on that, and is it emblematic of the fact that like the decline of the U.S. influence in the Asia Pacific region and the rise of China, and of course like there have been a lot of talks about the Asian century with the the rise of East Asia regionalization, and of course we also heard there was a decline of decline of Asian century from the former foreign minister yesterday, the talk that we had. So what's your take on that? Is it, of course, we also have the RCEP, like the RCEP and also the CPTPP without the US. So I just wonder what's your take on that? Thank you.
Okay, so we have three questions. One on carbon credits, which I'll say is pretty technical question, and the Asia Society Policy Institute has a climate team that has done a lot of work in this area, so I would refer you to that work. But my view is on all these climate issues, we need to keep a really open mind and to really think through a lot of these ideas, including carbon border adjustment mechanism, carbon credits, the whole subsidies issue we discussed, because we're only going to solve in my view, the climate challenge through some really innovative policies that haven't been tried before. Second, a great question on, all right, so there are more women entering the workforce. Are there differences? I think we'll let the panelists weigh in on that. And finally, the last question had to do with the whole issue of East Asian regionalization, East Asian economic integration, particularly at a time where the perception is that the U.S. is playing less and less a leadership role, at least when it comes to economic issues. So, Eun-Young, I'll turn to you first.
Actually, I wanted to take on the second question. Thank you so much for the question. I think you mentioned a great point. Yes, there are more women entering the workforce, but I think it is really important to note that they are in the starting and middle tiers of organizations. And when you still look up, you still see a very male-dominated leadership community in Korea. I don't have the stats off the top of my head, but I do know a couple of years ago when I was covering the Me Too movement in Korea as a journalist, Korea had passed some laws that make it mandatory for companies that have certain sized assets to have female board members. It became law. And then all the newspaper articles, the local newspaper articles were scrambling saying, where do we find these talent? Like, where are they? But the thing is, like, if you had worked to promote these women from the beginning, they would have been there. You would have a pool. And also, if you just open your mindset, there are great women working in places that I think just didn't get a chance because as DCM Sakurai pointed out, like people just didn't notice them. So going to your question about does having more women in organizations actually make a difference? I think yes and no. No in the sense that still in the leadership ranks, I think there's a dearth of women and more women need to be there. But on a more positive note, I think yes, because you have to start somewhere first. And second, I actually just realized I am the only person that doesn't have a child in this panel. And it's actually really inspiring. One of the things that has been great about the EFL program is I met Ara on my first day. We were jet lagged at an airport, I think in San Francisco. And she had told me, I just had my third kid. And he was like 100 days old or something. And then I remember telling her, you know what, I've accomplished my goal for this program. Now I know I can do this. And so I think it's good to have women in the organizations because it inspires people like me, and I'm just one sample size, but to show that it is possible to pursue your career and be able to do other things at the same time. And it also tells the leadership that you have a greater pool to choose from, so you don't have any excuses anymore.
Anyone else like to chime in on any of the three questions?
I want to briefly touch upon the second question as well. Yes, for at my law firm, which is the biggest in Korea, we have about 2,000 lawyers. But when I entered my law firm, only about 10% were women. But now, when we see our juniors, it's about almost 30 or 40%. So there are a lot of women lawyers, and I think. I believe networking with such women employees and having a mentorship is really important to have more women-friendly working environment, because such communicating our issues with our female colleagues not only helps in finding wise solutions, but also strengthens our mindset by fostering the belief that we are not the only one with that problem. And in this sense, Asia Society Emerging Female Leaders Program significantly influenced my perspective on my career as well as my family life. Previously, I was very skeptical about pursuing my career as an attorney at a law firm for a long time, feeling guilty, sacrificing my family for my career. But after participating in the program, I know now how I can make my family members be a part of my work as well as my life.
Please join me in thanking this great panel for joining us, and please